Are you seeing error 0x8018002A when a Windows device attempts automatic MDM enrollment? This error can appear when the automatic enrollment workflow cannot complete successfully. In a documented Microsoft scenario, a Microsoft Entra hybrid join device fails automatic MDM enrollment and the MDM event log reports 0x8018002A. The important point is that this isn't a problem we should troubleshoot by randomly resetting or rejoining the device. We need to identify where the enrollment workflow is failing. In this video, we'll move systematically from device registration, authentication, and enrollment configuration to event logs, MFA remediation, and final verification. Before troubleshooting the error, let's understand the workflow. Automatic MDM enrollment depends on several pieces working together. The Windows device needs the appropriate Microsoft Entra device state. The user must be correctly configured for automatic enrollment, and the device must be able to authenticate to the cloud services involved in enrollment. When those prerequisites are satisfied, the enrollment process creates the MDM relationship and allows the device to receive management policies. A failure at the authentication or enrollment stage can result in an enrollment error. Understanding this chain makes troubleshooting much easier because we can test each layer independently instead of guessing. Now let's focus specifically on 0x8018002A. Microsoft documents a scenario involving Microsoft Entra hybrid join devices where automatic MDM enrollment fails because multi-factor authentication is enforced. The Windows MDM log can report 0x8018002A, while the Microsoft Entra ID operational log can show an interaction required condition and AAD STS5D076 indicating that additional multi-factor authentication is required. This is an important clue because the enrollment process is attempting to use the logged in user's credentials without being able to complete the interactive MFA requirement that gives us a specific authentication path to investigate. Our next step is to collect evidence. Don't start changing policies yet. We need to determine whether the device itself is correctly registered, whether the user has a primary refresh token, whether automatic enrollment is configured correctly, and what Windows reports during the enrollment attempt. We'll use dsregcmd status for device and authentication state, Windows MDM logs for enrollment events, Microsoft Entra logs for authentication results, and the enrollment configuration for MDM scope and licensing. By collecting this evidence first, we can separate configuration problems from authentication problems and avoid unnecessary remediation. Here's the troubleshooting roadmap we'll follow. First, verify the device identity. Second, confirm the authentication state. Third, validate automatic enrollment configuration. Fourth, inspect the MDM enrollment logs. Fifth, correlate the Microsoft Entra authentication logs, especially when MFA is involved. Sixth, apply a controlled remediation appropriate to the identified cause. Finally, verify that enrollment actually succeeded. This sequence prevents us from jumping directly to destructive actions such as deleting device objects or repeatedly rejoining the device. Let's start with device identity. Open an elevated command prompt and run dsregcmd/status. For the Microsoft Entra hybrid join scenario we're investigating, verify the device state section. We want to see AzureAdJoined set to yes and DomainJoined set to yes. If either value is incorrect, stop here and investigate device registration before troubleshooting MDM enrollment. There is no value in changing Intune policies while the underlying device identity is not in the expected state. Microsoft specifically recommends checking these values when troubleshooting Windows automatic enrollment. Next, remain in the dsregcmd status output and inspect the SSO state section. The key value here is AzureAdPrt. In this troubleshooting scenario, we want AzureAdPrt to show yes. The primary refresh token is important because it represents the user's authentication state with Microsoft Entra. If AzureAdPrt is no, don't immediately assume that Intune is the problem. Investigate the authentication and PRT acquisition path first. Microsoft provides separate guidance for troubleshooting primary refresh token issues, including examining diagnostic information and Microsoft Entra logs. Now move to the enrollment configuration. Verify that the affected user is included in the Microsoft Intune Automatic Enrollment MDM User Scope. If the user isn't within the configured scope, the device may register successfully, but automatic MDM enrollment won't happen as expected. Also review the MAM user scope because Microsoft documents that an overlapping MAM scope can take precedence and cause enrollment issues. The goal here is simple. Confirm that the actual user attempting enrollment is covered by the intended MDM configuration. Next, verify licensing. The affected user needs an appropriate Intune license for enrollment. A device can have correct identity and authentication while enrollment still fails because the user isn't properly licensed. Check the user assigned licenses and confirm that the expected Intune service is included and active. Don't assume that because the organization has Intune available, every user automatically has the required entitlement. Licensing should be checked early because it is simple to verify and can eliminate an entire category of enrollment failures. Now verify the automatic enrollment configuration itself. If your organization uses group policy to trigger automatic MDM enrollment for domain-joined devices, confirm that the automatic MDM enrollment policy is correctly configured and deployed. Microsoft documents the policy named Enable Automatic MDM Enrollment using default Microsoft Entra credentials. Also verify the appropriate MDM discovery configuration and Windows enrollment prerequisites. The important distinction is that group policy can be used to trigger automatic enrollment, but group policy and Intune MDM are different policy systems. We will keep that distinction clear throughout this troubleshooting process. If the configuration looks correct, move to the device logs. Open Event Viewer and navigate to Applications and Services logs, Microsoft Windows Device Management Enterprise Diagnostic Provider, and then Admin. This is one of the primary locations for Windows MDM enrollment diagnostics. Look around the exact time of the enrollment attempt and identify whether Windows reports a successful enrollment, a failure, or no enrollment attempt at all. The absence of an enrollment event is also useful evidence because it can indicate that the enrollment task wasn't triggered. Now examine the enrollment events carefully. Microsoft documents event ID 75 as a successful automatic MDM enrollment event. Event ID 76 can indicate an automatic enrollment failure, but the exact error associated with the event matters. For example, Microsoft General Auto-Enrollment Troubleshooting documentation discusses 0x8018002B in event ID 76, while the specific 0x8018002A scenario is documented separately. So don't assume every event ID 76 represents the same root cause. Capture the actual error code and message from your device. For the documented 0x8018002A scenario, the next critical evidence comes from the Microsoft Entra ID operational log. Navigate through Applications and Services logs, Microsoft Windows, Microsoft Entra ID, and Operational. Look for authentication related events around the same timestamp as the MDM failure. Microsoft documents an interaction required condition with ADSTS 5076 in this specific scenario. That message tells us the authentication flow requires multi-factor authentication. This is the point where the device side error and the identity side error begin to tell the same story. Don't stop after finding an error message. Correlate the timestamps. Take the Windows MDM enrollment failure and compare it with the Microsoft Entra authentication event. If the same user, device workflow, and approximate timestamp line up, you have much stronger evidence of a causal relationship. In the documented 0x8018002A scenario, the device-side MDM failure and the intra-side authentication requirement provide exactly this kind of correlation. This is a professional troubleshooting technique because it converts separate log messages into a single evidence-based timeline. Now validate the authentication event from the cloud side. Review Microsoft Entra sign-in logs for the affected user and approximate timestamp. Check the authentication result, failure reason, conditional access evaluation, and authentication requirements. If MFA was required, determine which policy or authentication condition caused it. Don't simply conclude that MFA is the problem because MFA exists. We need to establish whether the enrollment workflow actually encountered an MFA requirement that it could not satisfy. This distinction is critical for producing a safe and technically accurate remediation. Now we reach the key diagnostic point for the documented 0x8018002A scenario. Microsoft explains that the problem can occur when MFA is enforced. The distinction between enabled and enforced matters. In this scenario, the automatic enrollment workflow is attempting to use the logged in user's credentials, but the enforced MFA requirement demands additional interactive authentication that can prevent the enrollment process from completing. So don't say that every 0x8018002A error is caused by MFA. Instead, say that this is a documented scenario and we confirm it through the MDM and Microsoft Entra logs. Once the logs confirm the documented MFA enforced scenario, apply a controlled remediation. Microsoft documents setting MFA to enabled but not enforced, or temporarily disabling MFA during enrollment in an appropriately trusted configuration. This should be treated as a controlled change, not a recommendation to weaken security for the entire organization. Scope the change as narrowly as possible, perform the enrollment, and then restore your organization's intended security posture. If conditional access is involved, review the specific policy and authentication requirement rather than making broad exclusions without understanding the impact. If your automatic enrollment configuration is delivered through group policy, you can refresh Windows group policy after making the required configuration change. Run gpupdate/force from an elevated command prompt. But there is an important distinction: gpupdate refreshes Windows group policy. It is not the Intune MDM policy synchronization command. In this scenario, the purpose of gpupdate is to make sure the enrollment related group policy configuration has been reapplied. After that, continue monitoring the enrollment process and its logs. If the device is already enrolled in Intune and you need to trigger an on-demand MDM check-in, use the Intune synchronization mechanism instead. From Windows settings, open account, select Access Work or School, select the work account, choose Info, and then select Sync. Microsoft documents this action as a way to force the device to communicate with the MDM server and retrieve policy updates. This is different from GP update. Group policy refreshes group policy. The settings sync action communicates with the MDM service. After remediation, don't assume the problem is solved simply because the command completed successfully. Monitor the next enrollment attempt. Return to the Device Management Enterprise Diagnostic Provider admin log and look for a new event. Microsoft documents event ID 75 as the successful automatic MDM enrollment event. If the enrollment still fails, capture the new error and compare its timestamp with the Microsoft Entra authentication events. The objective is to confirm a new successful enrollment event, not merely that a policy command ran without errors. Now perform the management side verification. Confirm that the device appears as expected in the management service and that the enrollment relationship is established. Depending on your environment, you may also verify that the device has received the expected management information. Don't confuse device registration with MDM enrollment. A device can successfully register with Microsoft Entra ID while still having a problem completing MDM enrollment. Your final verification should therefore confirm both identity and management state. Finally, return to the device and run dsregcmd/status again. Compare the current device and authentication state with the values you recorded at the beginning. Confirm the expected AzureAdJoined, DomainJoined, and AzureAdPrt values. This before and after comparison provides strong evidence that the identity and authentication layers are healthy. Remember that dsregcmd is a diagnostic tool for device registration and authentication state. It isn't a command that directly performs an Intune policy sync. Let's review the mistakes to avoid. First, don't repeatedly rejoin the device without understanding the failure. Second, don't delete device objects as a first response. Third, don't disable MFA globally just to make one enrollment work. Fourth, don't confuse group policy refresh with Intune MDM synchronization. Fifth, don't rely on a single log. And finally, don't declare success because a command completed successfully. A professional troubleshooting process identifies the failure, applies the smallest appropriate remediation, and then verifies the result through logs and management status. Let's summarize the complete method. Start by verifying device identity with dsregcmd status, confirm the authentication state and AzureAdPrt. Verify MDM User Scope licensing and automatic enrollment configuration. Then inspect the MDM event logs and Microsoft Entra operational and sign-in logs. For the documented 0x8018002A scenario, look specifically for evidence of enforced MFA and interaction required authentication. Apply a controlled remediation refresh group policy only when GPO is involved and use Intune Sync for an already enrolled device when an MDM check-in is required. Finally, verify successful enrollment and management. That's the difference between guessing and evidence-based enterprise troubleshooting. If you found this troubleshooting guide useful, subscribe for more enterprise endpoint troubleshooting videos.